The story of the new Swaminarayan Akshardham in Robbinsville, New Jersey reads like a modern epic, a tale of visionary dreams, patient craft, community labor, controversy, and eventual celebration. It is the kind of story that folds together ancient tradition and contemporary scale, that stitches thousands of individual acts into a single, luminous whole. To stand before the temple's carved marble facades is to feel that history and present have met. The patterns of medieval Indian stonework, the iconography of a faith that stretches back 2 centuries, and the logistics of a 21st-century global movement all converge on a suburban plain between Trenton and Princeton. The temple did not arrive overnight. It was summoned into being by a handful of leaders, tens of thousands of volunteers, and the slow, steady accumulation of decisions and craft over more than a decade. The idea of Akshardham in North America was seeded decades earlier by the spiritual leaders of the Bakasanwasi Sri Akshar Purushottam Swaminarayan Sanstha, known as BPS. Long before there were architectural plans or building permits in New Jersey, there was a vision articulated in the ashrams and satsangs of the Swaminarayan tradition, a place that could house devotional life, showcase the subtleties of Hindu art and architecture, and serve as a cultural bridge for younger generations of the diaspora. That vision, part devotional, part educational, was not merely to replicate a temple but to create a locus where community service, spirituality, and cultural preservation could meet on an expansive scale. The Robbinsville site itself was chosen after years of searching for a location that could accommodate not just a single shrine but a full campus. Land was purchased in 2008, a decision that reflected both ambition and restraint. This would be more than a neighborhood mandir. It would be a place large enough for festivals, exhibitions, learning centers, and quiet gardens. In 2011, a formal sanctification of the foundation stones took place, a ritual moment that fixed the spiritual intention of the project before the first bulldozer ever moved. Rituals and ceremonies like these are not mere formalities in the Swaminarayan tradition. They are the way community and the divine meet, and they anchor the building project to a lineage of practice that reaches back through millennia of temple construction in India. From a practical standpoint, the temple's construction was a feat of modern engineering married to hand-hewn craft. The structure that now rises, its central sanctum flanked by smaller domes and pavilions, its exterior a riot of figurative and floral carving, was created using imported stones and a huge team of artisans. Italian Carrara marble and other types of stone were chosen for their luminosity and ability to take fine carving. The pieces were quarried, shipped, and then assembled on site like a giant jigsaw puzzle. Reports counted tens of thousands of carved elements and millions of hours of artisan and volunteer labor invested in the project. Those hours were not anonymous. They represent the time of sculptors who learned or maintained centuries-old skills, as well as volunteers from the community who moved materials, polished surfaces, organized logistics, and sustained the temple as a living project rather than a mere construction site. As the structure grew, so did the stories around it. The builders sought to be faithful to the ancient Nagara style of North Indian temple architecture, and so the mandir's profile and ornamentation echo temples in Gujarat and Rajasthan, a towering shikara, layered terraces, and an exterior skin dense with carved narrative panels. But this was not a museum piece. The interior planning accommodated spaces for daily worship, shrines to a number of deities important in the Swaminarayan tradition, and modern amenities for visitors. Within the sanctum, the central images, the murtis, carried deep symbolic weight, a towering figure of Bhagwan Swaminarayan in a panchdhatu alloy, a throne carved and embellished to emphasize both regal majesty and affectionate care. Across the campus, there are halls for exhibitions, a welcome center designed in the Haveli tradition, galleries where the story of the faith and the lives of its leaders are told, and even practical facilities like a cafeteria and learning spaces for children and adults alike. The project's scale meant that it could not simply be a local news item. As the temple's silhouette rose against the New Jersey sky, it began to draw national and international attention. Journalists described it as one of the largest Hindu temple complexes outside India, a characterization that carried with it both admiration and scrutiny. Supporters celebrated the temple as a cultural beacon, a place where children born in America can learn classical arts, where non-Hindus can find in the carvings and exhibitions an invitation into a different spiritual world, and where the architecture itself speaks to continuity and endurance. For many in the Indian diaspora, the temple was nostalgic and forward-looking at once, a way to preserve ancestral aesthetics while embedding them in a North American context. But history is never without its tensions, and the Akshardham project was no exception. As excavation and assembly moved forward, allegations surfaced about working conditions for some laborers, leading to lawsuits and investigations that became part of the temple's public story. These controversies forced the BPS organization to answer hard questions about labor practices, oversight, and the obligations that come with such a high-profile project. For the community, the dispute was painful. It exposed the dissonance between the temple's spiritual message of service and the messy realities of construction in a complex, globalized world. Over time, many of the allegations were litigated or retracted, and a federal inquiry eventually moved toward closure. But the episode remained a sober reminder that grand projects invite intense scrutiny, and that learning to manage scale responsibly is itself a form of stewardship. Despite those upheavals, the dedication itself was staged as a moment of exuberant ceremony and sober reflection. On October 8, 2023, a grand dedication event brought together thousands, spiritual leaders, volunteers, politicians, and visitors from across the country. The program blended devotional chanting, classical dances, a marching band, communal feasts, and fireworks, a sequence designed to celebrate both the divine and the human labor that made the temple possible. For BPS and many attendees, the dedication was not an endpoint but a new beginning, a call to continue the work of spiritual growth, cultural education, and community service on the vast campus that had been entrusted to them. Walking the campus after the dedication, one notices the deliberate choices that aim to make the space accessible and meaningful. The Welcome Center, carved wooden ceilings and lanterns evoking the warmth of a traditional Indian haveli, is intended to invite visitors into the cultural logic of the site. Exhibits explain the life of Bhagwan Swaminarayan and the lineage of teachers who shaped the movement. Interactive displays and curated narratives help situate the temple in a larger history of Indian religious practice. Gardens and water features create reflection points. Pathways lead to smaller shrines where quiet worship is possible. The place is at once a tourist destination and a functioning religious campus where daily life, the ringing of bells, the offering of flowers, the cadence of arti, continues in familiar rhythms. One of the most striking aspects of the Robbinsville Akshardham is how it reframes questions about identity for the Hindu American community. It provides a public, permanent site for festivals, for rites of passage, and for the display of art forms, classical music, dance, language classes, that might otherwise drift through diaspora life. More than that, it creates a visible contribution to the American religious landscape, a temple that sits alongside churches, synagogues, and mosques as a signal of pluralism. For children growing up within the community, the temple offers an environment where learning about their heritage is not only possible but encouraged. For outsiders, it offers an invitation to encounter a tradition on its own terms, which can be a corrective to stereotypes and a conduit for curiosity. Yet the temple's history also raises broader questions about adaptation. How do traditions founded in a particular geography translate to a different climate and legal environment? How do volunteer-driven religious communities balance the need for skilled artisans with the regulatory frameworks of labor and immigration? The Robbinsville story suggests that answers are messy, iterative, and inevitably political. It is a narrative about the ways diasporic communities attempt to replicate textures of homeland within new contexts, and about how such efforts must inevitably negotiate local law, national media attention, and the expectations of a global membership. In that sense, Akshardham is a microcosm of the larger story of religion in a globalized age, part continuity, part innovation, part negotiation. There is also a technological and environmental layer to the story. Large temple complexes are not merely stone and ritual. They require heating systems, wastewater management, and careful landscape planning. The Robbinsville campus incorporated modern systems for sustainability and visitor management, from solar arrays to heated stone floors in select spaces, and a design that seeks to preserve the pastoral qualities of the surrounding New Jersey landscape. Those decisions are reminders that the spiritual and the practical must coexist. A sacred site has to be hospitable and maintainable in a contemporary setting, and the choices about energy, materials, and accessibility are part of the ethical calculus of building. When historians look back at the Robbinsville Akshardham in 50 years, they will likely see it as emblematic of the ways religious communities from South Asia established permanent, monumental presences in the West during the early 21st century. They will note the temple's stylistic fidelity to Indian forms, its scale, and the public conversations it provoked about labor and transparency. They will also note the quieter legacies: the children who learned classical music under its roof, the volunteers who turned up every weekend for years to sweep terraces and polish railings, the interfaith delegations who came to learn and to speak. These smaller, everyday acts, less dramatic than a dedication ceremony but more consequential over time, will shape the temple's memory in ways that press releases and headlines cannot fully capture. The Robbinsville Akshardham is not a closed book. Its history continues to be written in the events it hosts, the classes it offers, and the conversations it encourages. It is a place where devotees find solace and where curious visitors learn, and every year will bring new festivals and new participants. For those who built it, the project was an act of devotion that linked them to a lineage and gave shape to long-cherished ideals. For the surrounding region, it became a landmark that draws visitors and creates a new kind of public sacred space. For anyone who cares about how tradition adapts and persists, the temple offers a living case study. So much of history, it seems, is not found in single dates, but in the slow accumulation of craft, law, ritual, and human care. In the end, the temple's story is both local and transnational. It is local in that Robbinsville's fields and borough officials, its volunteer base and builders, satellite temples and parishioners, all played indispensable roles. It is transnational in that the stones, artisans, spiritual texts, and ideas came from across oceans and centuries, and were reassembled on American soil into a monument that speaks to an audience far larger than any single town. The Swaminarayan Akshardham in Robbinsville stands, then, as an argument about belonging, that a community can carry its sacred forms across continents, and, with patience and controversy and a great deal of labor, set them down anew. If history is a conversation between past and present, the temple is one of the loudest and most eloquent speakers in that ongoing dialogue. The building itself will likely outlast many of the debates that accompanied its making. Marble endures, and carvings keep their lines. What remains harder to predict is how people will continue to interpret those images and rituals in the years to come. Will the complex become a pilgrimage site, a civic landmark, a childhood memory for generations of Hindu Americans? The answer will come from the ordinary work of visiting, teaching, celebrating, and caring. The Robbinsville Akshardham's history, then, is less a closed chapter than a prologue, an invitation to witness how faith becomes architecture, and how architecture, in turn, shapes faith. If you walk up the sweeping steps on a cool autumn morning, when the carvings throw long shadows across the plaza and the first lamps are being lit, you can feel that convergence of labor and longing, of policy and prayer. The temple is a place where stones remember the hands that shaped them, where ritual makes time circular for those who enter, and where a community reaffirms its commitment to both the past and the future. That is history in motion, messy, glorious, contested, and the kind that continues to unfold with every bell that rings and every footstep that crosses its threshold.